is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Matthew. And of course, thank you very much to the NATO Defense College Foundation, Ambassador Rizzo, also Luisa University for the invitation. I think when you receive an invitation to come to Rome, you just don't turn it down, but it's always great to be back here. I think the title here, Augmenting NATO's Southern Partnerships, is apt, but I'm not so sure if just augmenting is enough. Also in the program, it sort of talks about a little bit of a change in the discourse or changing the narrative. I'm not so sure it's just about the narrative and the discourse. I think it's really about the structural approach that we're looking at, and maybe that's something to focus on. So in that context, and I'll focus it more on the NATO Gulf sort of framework, really want to make 3 points. I mean, the first is, and here I will start more with the negative. I mean, if we're looking at the region right now, we're looking at the security environment. It's not only continues to be volatile and marked by uncertainty, and I said this already when I was here 2 years ago, but I think what we've seen since then is even more additional layers being added to that. And it's really a kind of a catastrophic situation. I mean, since the horrific events, of course, of October 7th, we've seen more layers being added. And then if you're talking about a view from the Gulf states, the GCC states, I think there are really deep concerns about them being pulled in, being dragged in unintentionally into wider conflict situation. Whether that means, the energy facilities in the region. We already have a precedent on that, the attack in September 2019 on Saudi Arabia oil facilities. The fact that the Gulf states host many US bases, which could be subject to further retaliation. The heightened extremism that is the result of everything that we've seen over the past years. And you really have to be concerned about, is the current wave of violence, what is this producing ultimately in terms also of future generations? And I mean, and then if we're talking about possible altercations, what this means between Israel and Iran, I think there's concern in the region that we might see somehow like a repeat of what happened after 2003 in Iraq. This is really poor post-war planning when we see the state really just collapsing in itself, and the repercussions this had for the wider region. It took 2 decades for Iraq really to begin to recover from this. I mean, when we get down to the bottom, also in terms of NATO's approach, we've seen no effective policies being developed how to deal with violent non-state actors. We don't see any effective policies on ballistic missile proliferation, no effective policies on the Iranian nuclear program, even on maritime security, which has come, right into the headlines, questionable. There are concerns about the bigger events, climate change, energy transition, the world order in transition, future of artificial intelligence. And then you really have to think about, not just today, where is this all going? Reconstruction, even if we're talking sort of a day after, the reconstruction of infrastructure is probably easy, but how to reform the institutions so that they're really delivering on good governance, which is what much of the region requires, is more difficult. And I mean, I think also Florence was sort of mentioning it, sort of this change in mindset of future generations. I mean, my chairman, my boss, Dr. Abdelaziz Sagar, recently talked about, changing people. It's really about much broader, and these are much more difficult processes. So I think, at the moment, really, when the Gulf region looks also at the role of NATO, I think they don't see this comprehensive multilateral framework. They don't see any movement towards some kind of security system, which I think the region really desperately needs. So that's sort of point one, where we are. The second is, though, we do see, at least within the Gulf region, in the GCC, I think there's a recognition that a new approach is required, that we need to break with the patterns of the past, in order to reverse this sort of constant spiral of violence and pulling us down. And here the Gulf states have really taken the lead. Overall, on a whole de-escalation strategy, fixing the problems within the GCC, the rift over Qatar, that's coming back together on that front, taking a lead at the moment in offering diplomatic solutions to the issues in Gaza and the Palestinian issue, really taking the forefront and putting diplomatic coalitions together, fixing relations in the region, whether in Yemen, looking for the political solution, going away from the military approach, even in far away, not immediate theaters of conflict. Ukraine, Russia, the Gulf has played a role in terms of mediating prisoner exchanges. We see a GCC vision for Gulf security that was tabled earlier this year. It gives you a combined sort of vision of where these countries want to see the future going. And I think that's important. We see them reaching out to different partners. Definitely, I mean, there are driving factors for that, which is really the feeling that so far the international community has done little more than simply manage problems, but nothing really to contribute to solution of problems. There are doubts, of course, about US reliability, where this will going. Europe is not really seen as a serious security actor when it comes to the problem. And of course, there's concerns about own stability. There's a complete understanding that if this region continues to be defined by the violence that we see now, that all of the vision programs, all of the economic developments and modernization programs are somewhat at risk. So again, there's a conviction now in the region that it's time to act. It's time to move and it's time to move forward. And I think here an important message to NATO is simply that the GCC states will move. They're not going to sit around and wait now until others put their house in order and decide to have different approaches. They're ready to have, of course, NATO is an important organization. They want that relationship with NATO. They take it very, very serious. But again, if NATO is not there, they will move elsewhere because they cannot wait. They see the urgency of the situation. This is not to say that there's going to be, in case nothing happens, there'll be a break. I think there's fully still understanding that still the security is very much tied, of course, to the United States, to other Western actors. But a diversification is going on. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. And then just quickly, my third point, and here I will try to follow Florence's sort of looking a little bit more positively, maybe about some of the developments, and go back to this idea of a more structured approach I mentioned at the beginning. I think NATO's review process definitely is very positive. The recommendations of the expert group, and if you haven't looked at it, please do, because I think it's a very good document with lots of really tangible suggestions being put forward. Now, Mr. Romani has already outlined many of these things, where NATO wants to take it. But I think you need to take, in the future, the relationship NATO-GCC, I think, needs to be at the core of this a little bit. Because I think here NATO does have partners that are ready, that have increased capacity, that have the resources to play a role, and there's a convergence of interests between the two. So if I can just say, sort of focus on two specific issues, one's already sort of been mentioned, but I think we need to see more of it. NATO should take a look a little bit at the EU-GCC relationship and how it's developed over the last 2 years, where we really see a lot of good progress. And that starts with the appointment of an EU special representative, which is the good news that we now have that from the NATO side as well. But it's already gone into many different new institutional contacts. A structured security dialogue that is happening, a high-level forum that was held at the level of foreign ministers in April. Now, more recently, the first ever GCC-EU summit meeting, which really produced a joint statement that is very, very comprehensive. So what we see now in that, on the EU-GCC side, is a very multi-layered approach. There are bilateral programs, there are multilateral programs. It's very flexible, but it has a lot of potential now. And I think NATO can use that also to structure its approach going forward. And then you sort of pick two specific areas where I think action could be warranted. Maritime security is really at the forefront. We all need the freedom of navigation, the security of sea lanes, especially for an energy important region such as the Gulf. And I think from a Gulf perspective, it's almost kind of hard to understand how NATO is not playing a role as an organization when it is supposed to be a security organization. You have an American initiative, you have a European-led mission in the Red Sea. We don't see NATO in that sense. And then the second sort of area where I would also like to see more emphasis is the whole issue of artificial intelligence, because I think all of us are sort of feeling slowly being overwhelmed by it. And there's a lot of need for capacity building in the region. I think NATO has a lot of qualifications on that. And having the NATO Regional Center in Kuwait could be one area where you can do a lot more emphasis on this region, because there'll be a lot of interest. And I think that can foster then the partnership going forward. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Christian.